You've probably eaten raw fish without a second thought. A slice of cold tuna over rice, handed to you across a counter, and you just ate it. No heat, no pan, no hesitation. But say the words raw chicken out loud and something shifts immediately. Your stomach does something your brain didn't ask it to do. Raw pork sounds even worse. And even raw beef, which millions of people do eat, still comes with warnings and very specific rules. So why does one feel completely normal and the other feel like a dare? Here's the thing, your gut reaction is actually doing something remarkably intelligent. And the real answer has nothing to do with fish versus meat. It has everything to do with what's trying to survive inside you and how well it's built for the job. Raw fish isn't a modern food trend invented by trendy restaurants. Coastal communities have been eating raw seafood for thousands of years. Archaeological sites in Japan show evidence of raw shellfish consumption stretching back millennia, long before anyone had a word for sushi. Peruvian ceviche, which uses citrus acid instead of heat to prepare fish, traces its roots to ancient coastal populations with no reliable refrigeration. Raw fish is one of the oldest ways humans have ever consumed protein. But let's start where most people's fears start: parasites. Anisakis is a small worm that lives inside the muscle tissue of fish like salmon, cod, and mackerel. If you swallow a live one, it can burrow into your stomach lining and cause anisakiasis, a condition involving severe cramps, vomiting, and sometimes an emergency room visit to have it removed. That sounds genuinely alarming. And yet sushi-grade fish almost never causes this problem. The reason is boring, but effective. The FDA requires fish intended for raw consumption to be frozen first, either 7 days at standard freezer temperature or around 15 hours at much colder commercial temperatures. Freezing kills the parasite completely. Every reputable sushi restaurant in the world runs fish through a freezer before it ever reaches your plate. The danger was solved with a box that makes things cold. Not all fish carry the same risk either. Freshwater fish tend to host a broader range of parasites than saltwater species. That's part of why traditional sushi relied so heavily on ocean fish rather than river fish. Salmon sits in an unusual middle position, spending parts of its life in both environments. That's exactly why farm-raised salmon, grown in controlled parasite-free conditions, became the reliable option for raw preparation over wild-caught varieties. The ocean isn't uniformly safe. It's just safer in the specific ways that matter here. Now compare that to what actually makes raw meat dangerous, and the story changes completely. It's not really about worms. It's about bacteria, and specifically which bacteria are built to thrive inside you. Raw beef and raw poultry can carry E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter. These three organisms evolved inside the gut of a warm-blooded mammal or bird. Your gut is also warm. Your internal temperature sits right inside the range where these bacteria are literally designed to grow. A cow, a chicken, and a human maintain roughly the same internal climate. Bacteria adapted to live in one of us are terrifyingly well prepared to live in the rest of us. If you find this kind of science fascinating, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what we cover next. Poultry is the clearest example of this. Campylobacter alone causes over 1 million illnesses every year in the United States. Raw or undercooked chicken is one of its most consistent sources. It's one of the foodborne illnesses that public health agencies track year after year with grim regularity. That's a major reason why raw chicken triggers near-universal disgust in a way that raw tuna simply never does. Fish don't have that kind of advantage over us. A cod spends its entire life in water cold enough to give a human hypothermia within minutes. The bacteria that colonize a fish's gut are called specialists, adapted to function at temperatures that would shut down their metabolism inside a warm human body. Drop most of them into a human intestine at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and they simply can't compete. It isn't a hospitable environment for them. They never evolved to live there. Disease ecologists have a name for this pattern. It's sometimes called the phylogenetic distance effect. The basic idea is that pathogens jump more easily between closely related hosts. A pig and a human share an enormous amount of biological architecture. That's precisely why raw pork has such a terrible reputation. Trichinella spiralis, the parasite behind trichinosis, spread through pork for centuries. It was largely eliminated from commercial pork in the developed world through modern farming and inspection standards. But ancient cultures didn't need a microscope to understand that something was wrong with raw pork. They just watched what happened to the people who ate it. In the United States alone, Trichinosis infections were counted in the thousands every year during the early 20th century. Almost all of those cases were tied to undercooked pork and raw sausage. It took stricter farming practices, new animal feed regulations, and sustained public health campaigns to push those numbers down to the handful of cases recorded today. The fear didn't come from nowhere. An entire generation lived through the consequences before the rules finally caught up. From an evolutionary standpoint, fish are about as distant from us as any animal we commonly eat. Salmon and humans diverged from a common ancestor approximately 400 million years ago. Cattle and humans diverged far more recently. The organisms living inside a salmon have had 400 million years to become spectacularly bad at surviving inside you. The organisms living inside a cow have had much less time to lose that ability. Take that same rule to its logical extreme, and you get the most dangerous raw meat a person can eat: primate meat. Bushmeat from chimpanzees and gorillas has been directly linked to some of the most deadly zoonotic jumps ever recorded. HIV is now understood to have originated from a chimpanzee virus that passed to humans through this exact kind of contact, probably decades before anyone recognized what was happening. When the animal on your plate shares almost your entire genome, there's almost no biological barrier left for the pathogen to cross. There's also a cultural dimension here, and it's worth mentioning because it directly challenges the idea that food fear is a universal human instinct. Many cultures eat raw beef without hesitation. Steak tartare in France, kibe naye in Lebanon, yuko in South Korea, and carpaccio in Italy. None of these are fringe foods. They're centuries-old dishes served in serious restaurants. So the aversion to raw meat isn't hardwired the same way that disgust toward rotting fruit is. It's learned, regional, and shaped by the specific food safety disasters each culture has had to survive. If you're learning something new right now, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode like this one. There's an even sharper example at the extreme end of the climate spectrum. Inuit communities have long eaten raw and fermented meat from seals, whales, and caribou. Foods like muktuk and iguanak have sustained Arctic populations for generations. These animals are mammals, far closer to us biologically than any fish. In theory, this should be more dangerous than eating raw beef. But the animals involved spend their entire lives near the freezing point. Their bacterial populations are radically different from what you'd find in a warm feedlot animal. Distance isn't only about the evolutionary tree. It's also about the temperature the organism grew up in. That's exactly why the fish story and the Arctic story end up pointing at the same underlying rule from two completely different directions. Psychologist Paul Rosin, who spent much of his career studying disgust, argued that food aversions function less like fixed instincts and more like inherited warnings. A culture has a bad enough experience with something once, and the caution persists for generations, even long after the actual risk has nearly disappeared. American discomfort with raw chicken traces back to a very real and very recent history of salmonella outbreaks. Japanese comfort with raw fish traces back to an equally real history of coastal communities consuming it safely for thousands of years. They refined exactly which cuts, which seasons, and which preparation methods kept people alive. That accumulated knowledge became a cuisine, and that cuisine became trust. So raw fish isn't safer than raw meat in some absolute, universal sense. It's safer for very specific and completely identifiable reasons, called adapted organisms that struggle to survive in a warm human body. A freezing process that kills the most significant parasite before the fish ever reaches your plate. And 400 million years of evolutionary separation that prevents fish pathogens from ever feeling truly at home inside us. Raw beef and raw pork carry a different category of risk entirely, because the organisms living in those animals come from hosts that are biologically so close to us that crossing over is almost effortless. Warm blood recognizing warm blood. There's one more layer to this that most people never consider. Your disgust response itself is a kind of ancient immune system running in parallel with your biological one. It didn't evolve to be accurate in every specific case. It evolved to be conservative, to throw up a red flag whenever something might be dangerous. Sometimes it overcorrects. Sometimes it flags things that are perfectly safe, like well-prepared raw beef, because the category once was dangerous. And sometimes it misses things that are genuinely risky, because the category never built up a bad reputation in your specific culture. Your instincts aren't wrong. They're just working off inherited data that was collected long before modern food science existed. The remarkable thing is how often that ancient data still turns out to be pointing in roughly the right direction. Not because your ancestors understood microbiology, but because they survived long enough to pass down their caution. And that caution, generation after generation, became the feeling in your stomach that shows up before your brain has time to think. Before we wrap up, if you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe and leave a comment below telling us which food myth you'd like us to break down next. The next time you hesitate before eating something raw, you're not being irrational. You're running a probability calculation that your body inherited from thousands of years of trial and error. The fish on your plate has 400 million years of evolutionary distance working in its favor. The chicken next to it has almost none. That's not a feeling, that's biology, and your gut already knew it.